To another topic that does affect global affairs here, and it is our relationship with the US, and that's been in the spotlight in the past couple of weeks. I think from some there seems to be a bit of growing lack of trust in the United States. Only hours before our Victorian debate, tariffs were implemented. For instance, Ms. Game, this one to you first. Can we still rely on the US as a strong ally?
I don't really know, and that's the problem. We've underspent on defence for so long that we don't have a deterrent capacity anymore. And, you know, what we've seen the current president do is basically say you need to be able to look after yourself. You know, don't expect us to do it. And I think that's a very reasonable position. And I think we should be able to provide reasonable deterrence. So we should be investing far more in defence and especially into our personnel on whom everything relies.
Mr. Patrick, I know you've been critical of AUKUS. Again, I'm interested. What's your alternative to an alliance with the US at the moment, especially with its current administration?
Well, we have a long-standing relationship with the United States. However, things have changed. I don't think anyone would suggest that everything is normal, and we have seen a US president that has engaged in things that don't kind of sit with our values. Threats to invade Panama, threats to take Greenland, to try and annex Canada as the 51st state, basically endorsing Putin's invasion of Ukraine. These are all things that are inconsistent with Australian values. There's no doubt that there's been a change in Washington, and we need to react to that. And in some sense, it's a good wake-up call. I want to have a strong, capable, flexible, and sovereign defence force capability. And I'm going to depart briefly from Jennifer's views in respect of defence. Look, there are people that advocate for spending more money, but I don't think we can spend more money with defence until they start spending it responsibly. To give a couple of examples, we spent $4 billion not buying a French submarine. We've had a future frigate program that's blown out by 2 to 3 years in terms of delivery, and $15 billion. We've got a defence department, and I'm not being critical of any of our soldiers, airmen or sailors. I'm talking about people in Canberra that are simply not spending our money wisely. And I think we've got to take, whilst I sort of agree with this sentiment that we've got to have, we need to look at defence spending. We need to look at how they spend it first and fix that problem so that we don't end up with more defence waste.
Mr. Brohier, your party's platform does explicitly call for, quote unquote, supporting the US alliance that guarantees Australia's national security, end quote. Is that still guaranteed with the current situation we find ourselves in and with what the US is currently proposing and doing?
Well, we don't know. We know we have a treaty, and we would assume that the US will honour that treaty. But as Jennifer said, it's respectfully wrong for us to rely completely on the US. We have to develop our own capacities. And one of the issues is we have to staff the ADF. Now, ADF shrank last year, and it's my submission that the diversity, equity, inclusion policies that the ADF is promoting hasn't worked. It doesn't work. We've got to recruit people on the basis of merit. The Americans have done that. For better or for worse, you may criticize President Trump, not that it matters what we say about him, but since he's coming to power, the US has started meeting their recruiting targets, which they weren't under President Biden, and the American forces are growing. We have to start getting the message out that you can come into the ADF on the basis of merit, not on the basis of DEI, and that will help us.
Just to rebut some of that, and I'm not sure whether Christopher would depart too much from what I'm about to say, but in terms of looking at the US alliance and talking about treaties, we have a free trade agreement with the United States, and they are breaching that agreement. So there's no question that the United States is not meeting its written commitments to us. Just in relation to diversity across our Defence Force, look, I think that there's a conflation of issues there. Our Defence Force only recruits on the basis of merit. That's the way it has done business for a very long time. And if you, doesn't matter about your diversity, as long as you meet the criterias that are equal across the Defence Force. Look, you know, the requirements for a pilot might be greater than that for a cook, but it is a merit-based system that we have already for our Defence Force recruitment.
Any response to that, Mr. Brohier, just quickly?
That's not the optics that the Defence provides. You can read Greg Sheridan writing in The Australian about this recently, that the ADF is promoting DEI concepts, and therefore I respectfully disagree with Rex.
Well, I'm a former member of the Defence Force, and I still am in contact with many members of the Defence Force. I've been through the process myself. I think following Greg Sheridan's views on this might be a little bit dangerous in this instance.
Well, it may be, maybe not. Greg Sheridan is the leading defence commentator in this country. And so perhaps you're wrong, Rex. As to the issue of tariffs, that's a completely different issue to a defence treaty if we're at risk. But I pick up on what Jennifer said. We can't expect America to come to our aid all the time, and we can't expect to build our defense on America. We have to start being able to stand on our own 2 feet. And it was tragically shown when the Chinese sailed 3 ships around Australia, and we couldn't even put a frigate in the water to follow them. We couldn't even put a plane to follow them. We had to rely on Virgin Airlines. So something's
wrong. That's simply not correct, okay? There was an Anzac frigate that was trailing.
That was a New Zealand frigate. It wasn't one of ours.
No, there was an Australian frigate that was trailing that vessel. There were Australian aircraft trailing the vessels. At one stage, our partner, New Zealand, took over the trailing activity because we cooperate in a joint fashion with them. So, and look, just so everyone's clear here, there is nothing unlawful that the Chinese did in terms of circumnavigating Australia. We, all of the time, exercise our right of freedom of navigation through the exclusive economic zone of China. They've done exactly the same thing. The point, and this, you know, you are correct in this regard, the point that we take away from that circumnavigation is that the Chinese Navy is no longer a brown water navy; it's a blue water navy that can deploy in distance. But we were able to respond to the circumnavigation. And you know, you also don't know, Christopher, and I don't know, but being a former submariner, I suspect there was also other assets looking at those vessels as they travelled around our coastline.
All right, yeah. I'm just conscious. I'm very conscious of time, Mr. Brohier. Very brief response, if you can.
Well, respectfully, is that there's a massive difference between our maintaining the shipping lines through the South China Sea and China circumnavigating Australia for no apparent reason apart from to send a message and conducting live fire drills. There's a massive difference.
Ms. Walter, just very, very quickly, your thoughts on whether the US can still be relied on broadly as an ally?
Your original question, of course. While this is really, really important conversation, South Australians are really, this is not on their radar, for want of a better word. They're worried about cost of living, health, jobs, the economy more broadly. And if we look at what's happening in the US now, and certainly I was reading some polling recently, and half of Australians disapprove of the actions that Trump are taking, and 34% of Australians are strongly disapproving, and we see that even from US citizens. Yes, we do need to protect our borders, and we should be looking for, as has been described, a plan B. But what about our closest neighbours? What about looking towards Indonesia and other countries that we probably need to have better relations with? But I want to bring it back to local, to South Australia. And we talked just briefly about veterans and recruitment to the ADF. I think there's a really strong case for looking after those that are already in the ADF, especially our veterans that are suffering terribly with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Who's talking about that right now? I don't think anyone's talking about that. So all these other global issues are certainly important, and they're going to be a very important platform for the two majors leading up to polling day. If we bring this back to a local and a South Australian perspective, most mums and dads and people on just barely a living wage are more concerned about cost of living, health, accessing doctors, and certainly putting a roof over their heads as we've described. Thanks, Leo.